Week 2 of Derek Chauvin's murder trial got underway Monday with crucial testimony from the head of the Minneapolis Police Department. Chief Medaria Arradondo told the jury Chauvin violated his training by kneeling on a handcuffed George Floyd. Earlier in the day, we heard from the emergency room doctor who tried to save Floyd's life but ultimately pronounced him dead. CBS News correspondent Jamie Yuccas has been following the trial and is in Minneapolis with the latest.
Astonishing testimony from Minneapolis's top cop.
When I look at Exhibit 17, and when I look at the facial expression of Mr. Floyd, that does not appear in any way, shape, or form that is light to moderate pressure.
Chief Medaria Arradondo, the first black person to lead that city's police force, tearing down the blue wall of silence and condemning Derek Chauvin's use of force on George Floyd.
To continue to apply that level of force to a person proned out, handcuffed behind their back, that in no way, shape, or form is anything that is by policy, it is not part of our training, and it is certainly not part of our ethics or our values.
Arradondo says his officers are required to know department policies, including the use of de-escalation techniques, which he did not see in the videos.
That action is not de-escalation. That action goes contrary to what we're taught.
CBS News legal analyst Ricky Kleeman.
What are the implications for a juror when they see the chief of police testifying against someone who used to be an employee?
It cannot possibly be underestimated what influence a chief of police would have on a juror. A juror is a citizen of this county, and they look to this police chief as the person who has the aura of authority.
Arradondo, seen here kneeling in front of Floyd's hearse, fired Chauvin and the 3 other officers who were at the scene. He later released this statement saying, quote, "Mr. George Floyd's tragic death was not due to a lack of training. The training was there." He goes on to say that what happened to Mr. Floyd was murder. Earlier, Bradford Langenfeld, the doctor who pronounced Floyd dead at the hospital, took the stand. He says Floyd's cardiac arrest was most likely due to a lack of oxygen.
At the time, based on the information I had, it was more likely than the other possibilities.
And doctor, is there another name for death by oxygen deficiency?
Asphyxia is a commonly understood term.
Defense attorney Eric Nelson took more than an hour to try and pick apart the chief's testimony, showing at the time of the incident it was not against policy to use a knee on the neck as a use of restraint. Elaine?
Jamie Yuccas, thank you. For more, let's bring in CBS News legal contributor Rebecca Roiphe. Rebecca is also a law professor at New York Law School. Rebecca, it's good to see you again. So we've now heard 3 officers, including the police chief, say Derek Chauvin's use of force was excessive and should have ended sooner. How big of an impact does that have on the defense's argument that George Floyd's death was caused by a heart condition and drug use?
I think this testimony is really more important to proving Derek Chauvin's state of mind. The prosecution has to show each element of a crime. It has to put evidence forward that establishes each element of the crime. And one of those elements is the defendant's intent. And so in order to show culpable intent, the prosecution has to show that he wasn't acting appropriately. He wasn't acting according to policy. And this testimony is powerful for showing that. In terms of the question of cause of death, that's a really great question because I think that's going to be critical to the prosecution's case. In a way, this evidence does help prove that as well, in that all of these policies are designed to ensure that the police do their best to keep the public safe. And so to the extent that Derek Chauvin was violating these policies, perhaps he was in some ways putting George Floyd in jeopardy, his health, his welfare in jeopardy. And that is relevant also to the cause of death question, though less dispositive than it is to his state of mind.
So on that, Rebecca, the police chief did say Chauvin's actions violated department policy. Do you believe that assessment plus the video evidence we've seen are enough to convict Chauvin of second-degree murder, the most serious of the crimes he's charged with?
Yeah, so for second-degree murder, the prosecution has to show that Derek Chauvin caused Floyd's death while committing another felony, and the felony here is assault. So they have to prove that he was intending to assault George Floyd while he caused his death. Now, I think that testimony goes a long way to showing that he was not doing something appropriate and maybe even intended to hurt or assault Floyd while he had his knee on Floyd's back and neck. The main question here, and the question that this whole case is going to come down to, is cause of death. So part of that charge is also that Derek Chauvin's actions caused the death of George Floyd. And we really haven't heard enough yet on this to make a conclusion. We know that the medical examiner, we know from the opening statements that the medical examiner concluded that the cause of death was cardiovascular arrest. And that, while that's not inconsistent with asphyxiation, it is also not asphyxiation. So we're going to hear from these experts, and I think the case is going to come down to that because, once again, all the defense has to do is poke some holes in the prosecution's case and suggest that it's possible that George Floyd might have died anyway from the drug use, from his pre-existing heart conditions, from the hardening of his artery walls, and that is what caused George Floyd's death, not the knee to his back. So I think we have a long way to go before the prosecution has proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt, especially on that difficult to prove second-degree murder charge.
Well, Rebecca, at the end of cross-examination, defense attorney Eric Nelson played a clip of the cell phone video next to police body cam footage. Chief Arradondo agreed that in that short clip, Chauvin's knee appeared to be on Floyd's shoulder. What did you make of that particular tactic from the defense?
Well, the defense has to do what it can, as I said before, to poke holes in the prosecution's case. The prosecution has the burden, and the defense has to just plant in the minds of at least one juror that maybe it isn't the way it looks. Maybe it isn't the way the prosecution is making it out to be. And so here I see this as that. This is just going to be added to future evidence that perhaps the cause of death is something other than Chauvin's knee. And so here maybe they can point to the fact that for a while, Chauvin's knee wasn't even on Floyd's neck. I don't think it's really all that effective in the long run because, of course, it doesn't really matter what happened for a few minutes. If we've all seen that video, and for a large part of it, we all know that, and I think the witness did also testify that George Floyd's knee was, for most of it, on the neck, even if he moved it right before the EMT, the emergency medical technicians, came to his shoulder. So, some of these things you just have to look at as these isolated events where the defense is just trying to, just sow some seeds of doubt that they might be able to pick up later when they try to develop a different line of questioning with a different witness.
All right, Rebecca Roiphe. Rebecca, thank you.
Thank you.